Sometimes the greatest journeys into the unknown do not have a happy ending. They have no ending at all, just a final, desperate stop. From the frozen poles to the burning desert, the price of discovery can be terrifyingly high. These are the worst expedition disasters in history. Number 10. In 1860, the Burke and Wills expedition set out to cross Australia from south to north, a journey no European had ever completed. They were lavishly equipped, but led by impatient men. The leaders, Burke and Wills, pushed ahead with a small party, leaving the rest behind. After a brutal trek, they reached the northern coast, but they were exhausted and their supplies were gone. The return journey became a race against starvation. They finally staggered back to their rendezvous point at Cooper Creek. They found the camp deserted, the fire still warm. Their rescue party had left just hours before. Trapped and too weak to follow, both Burke and Wills starved to death by the creek. Only one man from the advance party survived. Number 9. In 1849, a group of pioneers, desperate for gold, took a supposed shortcut to California. It led them into a barren, unforgiving landscape. They were the lost 49ers. Their oxen died of thirst, and the pioneers were forced to burn their wagons for firewood, their dreams turning to ash. The group was trapped. Their water was gone. In a last desperate attempt, 2 young men, William Manley and John Rogers, went for help. Miraculously, after walking for nearly a month, they found a settlement. They returned with supplies to rescue the few who were still alive. As the survivors left, one woman looked back at the brutal landscape and said goodbye to Death Valley, giving the place its haunting name. Number 8. In 1897, 3 Swedish explorers attempted the impossible. They would fly to the North Pole in a hydrogen balloon named the Eagle. Their ambition was greater than their technology. The balloon began leaking gas almost immediately, forcing them to crash land on the pack ice after just 2 days. Stranded hundreds of miles from safety, Salomon Andree and his 2 companions began a desperate trek south, hauling heavy sleds across the shifting ice. They did not survive the journey. For 33 years, their fate was a complete mystery, swallowed by the silence of the Arctic. Then, in 1930, their last camp was discovered. Their frozen bodies were found alongside their cameras and diaries, which told the whole tragic story. Number 7. The ship Karluk was the flagship of the Canadian Arctic Expedition of 1913. It was a state-of-the-art vessel for polar exploration. But the Arctic does not respect technology. The ship was caught in the ice pack and began a long, helpless drift away from its destination. For months, the crew lived on the frozen vessel until the immense pressure of the ice became too much. The Karluk's hull groaned, splintered, and broke. The 25 people on board scrambled onto the ice with what supplies they could save. They were now stranded on a floating sheet of ice. The captain made a heroic 1,000-mile trek to get help, but back on desolate Wrangel Island, 11 of the stranded party died before rescue finally came. Number 6. The Lady Franklin Bay Expedition was a scientific mission, with 25 men establishing a base in the incredibly remote high Arctic in 1881. They were supposed to be resupplied by ship, but for 2 years in a row, the ships failed to break through the ice, leaving them utterly alone. Following orders, Lieutenant Greely and his men abandoned their base and retreated south in small boats, hoping to meet a rescue party. They became trapped for the winter with almost no food. Starvation set in, driving the men to madness. One man was executed for stealing food. When a rescue ship finally found them in 1884, only 6 of the original 25 men were alive, surrounded by death and evidence of cannibalism. Number 5. In 1879, the USS Jeannette sailed north of Siberia, hoping an open polar sea would provide a route to the North Pole. Instead of an open sea, they found only ice. The ship was trapped and drifted for 21 months, a prison for its 33 crew members. Finally, the ice destroyed the ship. The commander, George DeLong, watched his vessel sink beneath the waves, leaving his men stranded on the ice. They began one of the most grueling retreats in history, dragging boats and supplies over hundreds of miles of ice toward the Siberian coast. They reached open water, but a storm separated their 3 boats. One was lost forever. DeLong's boat made landfall, but they were still lost. Unable to find help, DeLong and his men slowly starved to death in the frozen Siberian delta. Only the men from the 3rd boat survived. Number 4. In 1912, Australian explorer Douglas Mawson was on a sledging journey across Antarctica with 2 companions, Mertz and Ninnis. While crossing a snow-covered crevasse, the unthinkable happened. Ninnis, his dog team, and the sled with most of their food vanished into the abyss. Mawson and Mertz were 300 miles from base with only a week's worth of food. Their return journey became a nightmare of starvation. They were forced to eat their remaining sled dogs. Mertz grew sick and delirious, eventually dying. Mawson was now completely alone. He battled blizzards and starvation, the skin falling from his feet. He once fell into a crevasse and had to haul himself out alone. In an incredible feat of survival, he staggered the final 100 miles back to base, arriving just hours after the ship sent to rescue him had sailed away. Number 3. The story of the Donner Party is one of America's most infamous tragedies. In 1846, they took a shortcut that was no shortcut at all. The new route, called the Hastings Cutoff, was a disaster. It cost them precious time and resources as winter approached in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They reached the final mountain pass just as a massive snowstorm hit, blocking their way. 81 men, women, and children were trapped for the winter. Their food ran out. They ate their pack animals, then the leather from their wagons. Soon, the only thing left to eat were the bodies of the dead. A small group escaped on snowshoes to get help, a journey that also involved cannibalism to survive. Rescue parties were sent back to the main camps. When the rescuers arrived, they found scenes of unimaginable horror. Of the original 81 pioneers, only 45 survived the terrible winter. Number 2. In 1911, British explorer Robert Falcon Scott and Norwegian Roald Amundsen were in a frantic race to be the first human to the South Pole. Scott's team arrived at the pole on January 17th, 1912. They were not met with glory, but with crushing disappointment. A Norwegian flag was already there. Amundsen had beaten them by over a month. Heartbroken, they began the 900-mile journey back. The weather turned against them. One man died from a fall. Another, Lawrence Oates, was suffering from severe frostbite and slowing the team down. Knowing he was a burden, Oates left the tent during a blizzard, saying the now famous words, "I am just going outside, and maybe sometime." The last 3 men, including Scott, pushed on. They died in their tent, trapped by a storm, just 11 miles short of a massive supply depot. Their frozen bodies and journals, filled with tales of their heroic struggle, were found by a search party almost 8 months later. Number 1. The Franklin Expedition is the most haunting mystery in the history of exploration. In 1845, 2 ships and 129 men sailed away and vanished. Led by Sir John Franklin, they were searching for the Northwest Passage. Their ships were the most technologically advanced of their time, reinforced for the ice. In the summer of 1845, they were seen by whalers entering the passage. Then, there was only silence. For years, no one knew what happened. Dozens of search missions were launched. They found only scattered, terrifying clues, graves on an island, stories from the local Inuit of starving men. The Inuit told of men falling down as they walked, and of grim evidence of cannibalism among the desperate survivors after the ships were abandoned. Modern science suggests a perfect storm of disaster: lead poisoning from poorly sealed food tins, scurvy, starvation, and the brutal Arctic environment. The ships themselves were finally found, perfectly preserved on the seafloor in 2014 and 2016, over 160 years after they were lost. But even with the ships, the full story remains untold. The Franklin Expedition is the ultimate cautionary tale of ambition versus the unforgiving power of nature. The courage to explore is incredible, but sometimes survival itself is the greatest victory. For more incredible tales, check out our video on history's greatest escapes.